Welcome to The Chaos. I'm Jill Savage. Today is Tuesday, October 22nd. Is big tech trying to control what Americans think about Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Kamala Harris, and Tim Walz? Here to discuss is Blaze News editor-in-chief Matthew Peterson and Dr. Robert Epstein, who is with the American Institute for Behavioral Research and Technology Researcher. So, Dr. Epstein, you found what biased search results can sway voters anywhere from 20 to 80%, you said. So how are search engines manipulating these search results?
Well, first of all, we know, Jill, that they are. So I want to make that very clear. So if your viewers go to America's, with an S, americasdigitalshield.com, you'll actually see the data streaming in 24 hours a day. This is a real-time dashboard, and you'll see the content that big tech companies are sending to a representative sample, politically balanced sample of more than 16,000 registered voters in all 50 states. And what the system is showing us is the first, by the way, first monitoring system in the world that shows what big tech is doing. And what this shows is that they're sending very strongly politically biased content to people in 49 out of 50 states. And the only red state that they have is Arkansas, which is not one of the swing states. So right now they are sending highly biased content sufficient to shift in this election between 6.4 million and 25.5 million votes, and that's just in the presidential election. So that's what's happening right this minute. We're seeing it in real time. It's outrageous. They have truly undermined the free and fair election.
So let me bring up something that I've been in this argument before with people that I've heard many times, and I'm sure you have heard even more times when this debate comes up. And that is good. You know, smart people will say something like, well, look, it's just true that there's more content, right, created, news created. It tends left. The media tends to be left. And so, of course, these things are biased just because that's what most of the articles that are being published. I'm curious how you address that sort of argument.
Sure. Well, that's exactly what Google would like us to believe. That's what they say. It's absolutely, completely false. How do we know that? Well, first of all, if we go individual by individual, let's say Harris, we see very strongly liberally biased content being sent to anyone looking up any information about Harris. But if you look at people that they don't like, for example, Elizabeth Warren, who is as Democrat as you can be, they're sending extreme right-wing content to people who look up individual information about Elizabeth Warren. They want her out of office. They don't like her, even though she's a liberal, because she has gone on record calling for the breakup of Google. So believe me, they're not sending what's out there. They're sending whatever they want to send to manipulate people's thinking and their votes.
Well, maybe now's a good time to go through and just explain what the search engine manipulation effect is for the audience.
It turns out that most of the searches we do on Google or other search engines are for simple facts. So what is the capital of Idaho? In fact, I don't even know, but I could go to google.com and find out. The point is, 86% of the time we're looking for simple facts, and the simple answer turns up at the top. The correct answer turns up at the top. So we're like rats in a Skinner box. We are learning over and over and over again that what's at the top is best, what's at the top is truest. The problem is when we type something in on a topic where we're trying to make up our minds, Google knows this. They know that we believe whatever they put at the top. So all they have to do, and this is what SEAM is, all they have to do to shift the thinking of undecided voters is put at the top of search rankings content that favors their candidate, so that when someone clicks at the top, it takes them to a web page that makes Google's candidate look really good. And we know from more than 12 years of controlled experiments published in peer-reviewed journals, we know that when Google does this, it easily shifts between 20 and 80% of undecided voters after just one search. If they do it over and over again to undecided voters, the numbers go up higher and higher. And that is what they're doing. That's what we're preserving. We're preserving that evidence for the courts and for the Federal Election Commission. That's what they're doing right now with voters around the country. And there's something else that they're doing right now. They are sending on their homepage, they're sending more go vote reminders to Democrats than to Republicans. This is called the targeted messaging effect, TME, something we've also studied. And Google is doing it right now, and we're capturing the evidence.
So I'm curious, outside of what I hope all this evidence is used for, which is to bring them into account and hold them accountable for what they've been doing now for so long with the force of law. I'm all about that. But beyond that, just in terms of how this should work for human beings, right? I mean, having looked at this for years, what are your thoughts about how this should work? Like, what would the solution be ideally when it comes to search online?
Well, first of all, search online should be fair, but there's a problem there. If we had a kind of an equal time rule for search, it wouldn't work very well, because we want search to put things into order and put the best at the top. So an equal time rule just really wouldn't work. So what is the solution? The solution, which I published in Bloomberg Business Week, by the way, the day before I testified before Congress the first time, what will definitely work is for our leaders to make Google's index, make their data public. If they make their data public, then other people, other companies, high school students could build search engines on top of their excellent data. And now we would have competition in search. We'd have thousands of search engines all vying for our attention and all focusing on niche audiences. It would be exactly like the news arena, the arena that you're part of, where there are thousands of sources all vying for our attention. Google, in this case, Google would lose its worldwide monopoly on search. Search would be competitive. Search would be innovative again. And we wouldn't have to worry about this giant monopoly controlling our thoughts and opinions and votes worldwide. That is the solution, is to make their index, which is the database they use to generate search results, make that index public. There's a lot of precedent for that in law. We did something like that to AT&T a long time ago. There's a lot of precedent for it, even in Google's own business practices, where now and then they give other companies access to their data. So that is the solution. I've discussed it with Senator Ted Cruz and others. There's strong interest in it here, even stronger interest in doing that in Europe.
All right, Dr. Epstein, with the last question, with the time that we have, is what do people need to know? What have you uncovered then that they absolutely need to know before the election?
Well, they need to know that this election is not fair. It is not fair. I'm not a Trump person, and I'm not even a conservative, but I can tell you right now that Google alone can shift so many votes that they will determine who actually wins the election this year, and people won't even know what hit them. Fortunately, this time we will, for the first time ever, have a massive amount of data to prove for the courts and for the Federal Election Commission to prove what Google has done, which is to undermine our democracy.
Dr. Robert Epstein, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
My pleasure.
And Matthew, it's one of those things where we know this is happening, right? But every time he comes on the show and he points this out, you can't ignore the facts that he presents there.
Yeah, and this is it's so important because it's the water in which we swim, and so people are so used to it, they're so conditioned, like you said. This is the place that bias happens that we don't notice, whereas we do notice it on TV. Everyone knows the TV is fake news, but everyone still thinks they trust the digital framework that Google is showing them the digital world through. And that's why we can't emphasize what he's saying enough. And I also like the solution. The solution is there's no perfect search, but let competition, let 1,000 flowers bloom, and then we can actually, have a fair fight. But if people don't realize this, this problem will not go away.
It always reminds me of Cass Sunstein and nudge. We're just going to nudge you a little bit. We're not going to outright push you over there. We're just going to nudge you into what we want you to do. When we come back, Daniel Horowitz will tell us what Congress passed while we weren't looking. Just ahead. We know that there is a lot at stake with this upcoming election, but no matter who's sitting in the White House, the fuse on the economy has already been lit. Even 4 years of a conservative presidency will not be enough to turn the tide on our $35 trillion national debt. And if the left wins, it's like throwing gas on a dumpster fire. But, we don't have too much control over the election's outcome, as Google's trying to do there. But what you can do right now is protect your savings by diversifying into gold with the help of Birch Gold Group. For millennia, gold has stood firm in the face of greedy governments, all the economic upheavals and global strife that we've seen. And it can protect you now. Birch Gold will help you convert an IRA or 401k into an IRA of physical gold, which is going to be tax-free and penalty-free, and it doesn't cost you a penny out of pocket. So in the last 4 years, the buying power of the dollar has declined, and the price of gold has increased 40%. Do you think that's a coincidence? Text the word Jill to 989898 and get your free info kit on gold, and trust Birch Gold to protect your savings. Text Jill to the number 989898 today. Will Congress ever stop spending? It doesn't look like it, does it? As the House just passed a $1.5 trillion inflation bomb, or at least that's what BlazeTV host Daniel Horowitz is calling it in his latest piece for theblaze.com. He joins us right now to discuss all of this. And so, Daniel, what is this latest spending binge going to go towards right now?
Sure. It seems like every time we're at a crisis point of unprecedented debt and inflation, it's so bad now that despite 50 basis points of federal rates cut, you have the Treasury yields just exploding because there are so many treasuries that they have to offload on the market to service all this debt. 4.3 trillion just in 17 months since Kevin McCarthy's greatest spending cuts of all time. Not only do they do nothing to cut spending, but every single action of the Republican Congress is oriented towards growing it. So more than half of the Republican House, this is a pretty big problem. They wrote a letter to leadership asking to pass the 1.5 trillion farm food stamp bill in the lame duck session. Okay, when we talk about, so we're going to do nothing to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, military. All right, so the next thing you really have down that totem pole is going to be food stamps, which is about 80% of that bill, and agricultural subsidies, price controls, crop insurance, like 5-year Stalin plans, stuff that should be left to private enterprise and the states. And Republicans consummate all of that spending, lock it in some cases increase the subsidies on the agricultural side. And look, I look at this years later and I just realize we're not making any progress with Congress.
So Daniel, what would you say is the reason for that? The basic question would be, why can't Republicans say no to spending? Why can't they ever do this?
Well, they don't want to say no to food stamps because they don't want to be called mean, and they don't want to say no to big ag because 56% of the subsidies under Title I go to 10% of the farmers. You know who those farmers are. They're not Farmer Joe. These people are massive landowners, often internationally owned, massive companies. 94% of the subsidies go to 6 crops, but those six crops only account for 27% of the output value of all our farming. Those are your special interests. Those are where the donations come from. Remember, Republicans are obviously disproportionately from rural districts, but it's corporate farming, just like corporate medicine. It's very similar, those two industries. These 5-year farm bills are like Obamacare. They create mergers and acquisitions, box out small farmers, appreciate the price of land, and create artificial monopolies where now you only have a handful of farmers left, just like with hospital and private medical practice. That's what Obamacare did. So that consolidates the lobbyists and the donors, and you have no diversification even politically anymore. So they get what they want all the time, every time. And I think as we campaign in these final 2 months and we talk about Bidenflation, we do need to start thinking about the day after. If Trump does win, name me one policy Republicans plan to do that will alleviate that burden now that they're presumably, if they win, would own the political liability of inflation.
Yeah, and Daniel, this is such a huge issue right now because we see that if we just look at all of the spending, if we talk about the trillions of dollars that are out there and the pieces of the pie, well, now the interest on the debt is a larger piece of the pie than defense spending. How long can this math problem go on before, and again, Republicans, Democrats, everybody has to start addressing that because that's real.
So you touched on the core issue there with the interest on the debt, because it used to be, it was about, I guess it's something like $103,000 per person. And everyone's like, well, it'll never be paid off. That's down the road. I don't care. And let's face it, people are selfish, not just the politicians, but the public as well. Here's the problem. Now, this is not a government balance sheet issue. This is a you issue. This is a matter of you having to spend $10,000 to $15,000 more a year on the cost of living, and that's set to explode with another round. Remember, $4.3 trillion in new debt servicing over 17 months since Republicans passed the greatest spending cuts of all time. So Republicans never had a better opportunity to be the daddy party and go before the American people and say, look, are you enjoying this inflation? Presumably you're not. So we're going to have to end some of these programs. I think people now get this is not a theoretical futuristic problem. This is a here and now inflationary problem. But Republicans like to talk about it in the abstract. But again, they're going to cut more taxes, which we generally like, but that's going to add to the deficit. They're going to grow the military. They're going to pass more disaster relief that's not offset. I mean, everything they plan to do will only add to this.
Daniel, you called this a WWE style, political battle, which I think is very apt. It's a fake political battle because what happens in Congress is kind of fake, right? And so there's this whole performative, dance that happens with Republicans when it comes to this issue. How does that change? And also, at what point if it doesn't change, right? At some point, we should stop pretending that we're passing budgets, right? I mean, at some point, we should stop pretending that we care about these issues at all. And already, people don't believe them. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, is there a way for that to change? And if it doesn't change, is this process just going to become even more obviously corrupt as time goes on?
The way for it to change is for the conservative media and movement to not just be election month and election year focused, but to focus every day in between. And when you talk about things like the Farm Bill, you talk about the fact that we don't have budgets. The reason we don't have budgets is because we have these reauthorization bills of the mandatory programs that are on autopilot. Well, this is the time to fix them. Republicans consummate 100% of it. Democrats threaten to add to it. So Republicans say, well, we'll spend 50% less on the added burden. And then they go to conference and then they compromise and then add everyone's stuff. And that's really what they're going to ultimately do on this. I mean, look, you're not going to change the policies if you don't change the people. And as you well know, we've made progress in the legislatures, but in Congress, we have failed to knock out a single incumbent, well, except for the chairman of the Freedom Caucus. You look at the leadership. I mean, there was an article out today that Chuck Grassley, at 91 years old, is angling to be the Judiciary Committee chairman. His big accomplishment last time when we had the trifecta was passing jailbreak to let out the Chicago gangbanging degenerates. The number 2 guy, by the way, is Lindsey Graham. So, I mean, pick your poison. This is the problem.
Well, we want everybody to go out there and vote. Hopefully not for 91-year-olds out there, but everybody go out there and vote, because voting is going to be, one of the biggest things that we can do. But there are also the issue, Daniel, on the other side of that. There was a piece on the Blaze News that showed that 2 Connecticut Democrats allegedly helped non-citizens vote in a 2023 mayoral election. So how widespread do you think a problem like this actually will be this time around?
So the reason why that article is so important is that a lot of people focus on a national election where, you could have 160 million ballots cast and well, does it really make a difference? Well, I mean, first of all, we're seeing even at a presidential level, some states could possibly be razor thin. But you look at the multitude of down ballot mayoral races, city council, state legislature, school board, and you start thinking that we're in a scenario now where we have about 52 million immigrants in this country. Now, some of them are citizens, but again, record number of non-citizens permanently residing in the country. Legal immigrants, a lot of illegal immigrants that are probably not even included in that number. And then we have an honor system where we basically have motor voter, especially in all states we give to legal immigrants, and blue states we give driver's licenses even to illegals. But either way, they shouldn't be able to vote. And, they have to, on their own, make sure that they don't register. Otherwise, we're finding, in Florida, they found hundreds just spot checking were registered to vote. Are they massive numbers? Not yet. But in a very closely divided country, that will make a difference in critical races. And in local races and local primaries, it's going to make a difference across the country. And Jill, one other important thing people forget is illegals vote even when they don't vote. Okay, the fact that they're counted in the census, depending on the decade, it has given blue states anywhere from 8 to 10 new electoral votes. I want you to understand that, a lot of people are thinking of a scenario where Trump could come up short and he could get 268 winning the Sun Belt, but not the Rust Belt. That would give him, 268. Well, Democrat states have extra votes, like California have 3-4 extra seats, congressional seats. The margin that Obamacare was passed owes itself to that margin. I mean, it just, again, speaks to the point that if Trump does win, and in that case, there likely would be a trifecta, we cannot afford to squander it like we did last time. Preventing illegals from voting should have been a no-brainer last time. Not counting them in the census should have been a no-brainer. We cannot afford to squander governance to capitalize upon a win.
Well, amen to that. Hey, in the last 30 seconds we have with you, I can't let you go without asking, how are you feeling right now? How are you feeling right now about the great ramp up into November?
It's man, this is going to be a nail biter. I think I'm not going to tell you what I think, because I have no way of telling you, but I would be shocked if it's not close. I do believe in either direction it will be very close. And again, that's why you can't have illegals voting.
It's a huge deal. Thanks so much, though, for breaking it all down, as always. Not so much the prophet of woe and lamentation today, but we appreciate it.
See you soon. Take care.
When we come back, Chris Bedford will tell us which races will give the Republicans the best shot at winning both chambers of Congress. Next. Well, we know that there is so much to expose from the state-controlled media right now. And Peterson, this is why we have Blaze Media, and it's just a way to go out and fight against what you call legacy media. We know that they're filling every newscast, everything that they can put out there with lies right now.
Yeah, and they still have all the money. I mean, yeah, they're losing some, thankfully, audience, but they still have budgets that are way beyond ours. So we really depend on our subscribers to send people like Steve Baker and yourself out to Western North Carolina to report on what's really going on out there, to send Julio to Springfield, Ohio, so we can see that this is a lot more than cats and dogs being eaten out there. There's a lot of crazy stuff we discovered on that one. And all of that happens based on subscribers.
It absolutely does. And it's all just trying to go through and say there's a way to go through and fight and do it the right way and get back your way of life. And that's one of the things that you guys are doing with Frontier. Another thing that you can go through and look at for Blaze Plus subscribers. But be sure, if you want to join us right now, the best way to do it is blazetv.com/Jill. Use the code Jill40 at checkout to join the movement, and it'll give you the biggest discount that we've ever offered here at Blaze TV, because right now is the most important time that we've ever had. We know that we're going to make it to November 5th. What's going to happen, though, on November 6th, when everything could possibly change, as Daniel Horowitz was just saying? He thinks it's going to be close either way. So join us here, blazetv.com/Jill. Use the code Jill40 at checkout to join us here at Blaze Media. In the final 2 weeks before the election, what do Republicans need to do to regain control of the Senate? Here to break it all down for us is Chris Bedford. He's our Blaze senior politics editor and D.C. correspondent. So, Chris, which formerly safe Democrat senator, what seats are now up for grabs this time around?
Well, this is something we've been talking about on this show now for weeks, long before the bottom started to fall out of Kamala Harris's campaign. And even before Republicans started to look like the lock on the House of Representatives. This was a bad map to begin with for Democrats. A number of states that have since moved further red over the past couple of years had Democrats who, as opposed to being like a Joe Manchin figure who brought the bacon home and voted both ways and made sure that everyone had to court his vote, were kind of in lockstep with Democrats. I'm thinking of John Tester in Montana. I'm thinking of Sherrod Brown in Ohio. But the map has expanded beyond that. I mean, at this moment, you've got earlier today, Democrats with the Kamala Harris campaign talking on background to NBC about how they've written off, this is not a Senate race, but written off North Carolina. They're starting to worry that Wisconsin and Michigan, which do have important Senate races, may already be lost, that the map is already narrowing. Now, in these last 2 weeks, there's always a lot of dreaming in politics. I mean, you remember the night before Mitt Romney's loss, his top advisor and pollster told his wife that she's going to need to find new homes for their horses. They're going to need to figure out how to move their family to Washington, D.C. Well, that didn't happen. When you've got your advisors, though, saying the road is narrowing, this is becoming more difficult, we're taking on water. Democrats in Ohio, Democrats in Pennsylvania, Democrats in Wisconsin are starting to run ads where they talk about how close they are with Donald Trump, how bipartisan they are, where they start to talk about how they're going to stand up against Kamala Harris and the Democrat agenda for the people on a bipartisan message. Well, then you know that the polling, which is already bad in public, is even worse when you get the actually expensive private polling that these campaigns perform.
So now that we actually see the signs of this, and you can't really explain away the data, right? As you just said, I'd like to hear more about that. The blue wall candidates saying, "Oh, I'm actually good with Trump, and I'm not with Kamala." Once you see that, it obviously things are pointing in a certain direction. So, what do you think the odds are at this point of Republicans taking things back? How confident are they?
Republicans are the most confident of any of the House, the Senate, and the White House. They are the most confident on the Senate. This was a difficult map in the first place for Democrats. Were this 2020, where Donald Trump was underwater in popularity and the Democrats were up on popularity, it still would have been a tough map for Democrats because of a couple major retirements, because of Democrats in those changing states that have grown more Trumpy over the years. So now it's basically a lock. Now, what a Republican Senate is going to do for you, the American voter, is a whole other thing. They may do plenty for funding for Ukraine, but they're not exactly the tip of the spear as far as conservative politics goes. You would need a Donald Trump to win. And I've not seen since the RNC the optimism, even when things were looking tougher for Republicans, drop below people assuming he had this election and was going to be able to beat Kamala Harris. But at this point, it's not just the nerds in Washington. If you look at the betting markets, they're pretty bullish behind Donald Trump. I mean, if you've got a few extra bucks laying around and you want to hedge your bets for a happy day, put some money on Kamala Harris winning. You'll more than double it if she actually does. And what's the matter? I mean, I guess you're going to be having a good time regardless. And the House of Representatives has been up in the air, but I think that's going to go the way that the other houses go, the White House and the Senate. They're going to get that backing. Their Democrats are now looking at seats in Maine, seats in Alaska that have been not safely Democrat, but have gone that way over the past couple of years of anti-Trump hysteria. And they're starting to think, well, these guys might be cooked. Forget about making gains. They're now in a defensive position.
I know we have a couple other topics to get through here, but I don't want to, before we leave the Senate, if you look at this in terms of how Mitch McConnell has been spending his money, I'm curious what your thoughts are about that. I mean, for our audience, if you don't already realize this, there's always controversy about the Senate leader and who he gives money to and who he helps with his enormous pot of whatever, $400 million, and who he doesn't. And he's really the godfather, if you will, in these situations. So how does that look this time around? Has Mitch been fairly generous to everybody?
Not to everybody. No, Mitch McConnell is generous to people who he thinks he can count on to push his agenda, which is different from Donald Trump's agenda. It's different from most Republican voters' agendas. It's different from the conservative agenda. It is Mitch McConnell's agenda. And I mean, to be fair, it is his PAC, but I do think a lot of donors give to that PAC under the assumption that he's going to do things to protect an actual Republican majority. Now, I've seen, of course, Texas Senator Ted Cruz out there complaining that he's getting no money from Mitch McConnell. You see other folks who've gotten a little cross with McConnell for the exact same reasons. I do actually think that Cruz is safe. I think Democrats are probably overspending there, but McConnell is always and only going to spend money where he's confident. Now, initially, that was really just Montana and Ohio, but that map has started to expand. A funny thing is, when Democrat candidates put up ads saying that they're close to Donald Trump, well, that's when Senate Republicans know, well, I think this is time for us to do an ad campaign here to push that over the finish line.
All right, so we got the Senate out of the way. We've been dealing with all this. Now, Bedford, if I wanted to go out there and put a bingo card together or whatnot, because there's so many House races, you can't break down everything. But if you want to go out there, and you said in Maine, but give us some of these big House seats that we need to be watching for.
Yeah, I think in Maine, you get the Bellwether district up there in the north. There's a Democrat in Alaska that's worth putting your sights on. There's especially a lot of those holdover Democrats who've maybe existed because of Trump derangement syndrome or existed because of an historical tradition of bucking the trends and maybe voting for Democrats because of regional allegiances. These are the states that you want to look at for that, especially maybe places like Pennsylvania, which is when you talk to voters in Pennsylvania, they'll tell you who their grandmother voted for. That might be the case for different voters in other states, but it wasn't a dinner conversation around my household. The Pennsylvania has, and some of these other states have a more kind of traditional family loyalty to some of these parties. And those were deserved. I mean, places like Pennsylvania had the governor, Casey, the father of the senator who's now in trouble, who was a Democrat, and he was one of the last fervently pro-life Catholic working class Democrats. His politics probably look more like you would see with Donald Trump today, as opposed to with the actual Democratic Party today. Democrats in those districts, they're in a little more trouble.
All right, so we will round it out talking about the media again, one of our favorite topics, and the Donald. And as we were saying the other day here, I mean, it's still so remarkable to me. If he was on the other side, everyone would be talking about it as a strategy, right? That he's been on all these podcasts lately, really podcasts that are obviously geared towards young men for the most part. But the granddaddy of them all, right? The event that everyone has been waiting for is Rogan having Donald Trump on his show. And now we know that is going to happen this week, I believe, airing Friday. Your thoughts?
So I think it's exciting, right? I mean, this is a podcast. Donald Trump has actually been doing a number of these where it's sit back, lounge, talk it over, go into some interesting subjects. We now have not just Donald Trump filling fries at McDonald's, but you've got Donald Trump talking about cocaine. You've got Donald Trump talking about the bros. You've got Donald Trump's taste in music. All these different things are now out there. But yeah, just like you said, the granddaddy of them all is Joe Rogan, and he's an interesting character. He's not a classic Republican by any stretch. I don't think he's got any political ideas in line with Mitt Romney or Mitch McConnell. He's someone who's kind of a little bit more of a free thinker, someone who has to, in that free thinking, in that interesting conversation, has built the largest audience, really one of the only massive, truly national audiences that's still left in American media. And he's also someone who doesn't speak generally to powerful people who have big soapboxes. He's only going to talk to those people who have small microphones, but really interesting things to say. So I, for one, I've never really listened to a ton of podcasts that are as long as Gettysburg, the movie. But this Friday, our family is already going to be tuning in for sure. Maybe not with the kids, because Joe Rogan can sometimes be a little inappropriate. But to hear the kind of interesting stuff that's going on, and more than anything, this is reaching out to voters who are not politically active. The kind of guys who listen to Joe Rogan and a lot of these podcasts weren't out there at Tea Party rallies. They don't have Gadsden flags. They're not registered Republicans with their little American flag pins. They're like probably more in line with what we saw with the frat bros who protected the flag on college campuses. People who may have those sort of sympathies, people whose lives were really impacted negatively by COVID, whether their colleges or their high schools were shut down or their jobs were shut down. People who aren't necessarily tuning in to Fox News or certainly not MSNBC and CNN. It's a whole new audience, and it's a new generation of voters that could help change the political landscape. That is, if Republicans are ever able to recreate what this somewhat once-in-a-century political figure has been doing.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Chris. This might be the best media week that we will ever see from a presidential candidate, starting out at McDonald's on Sunday and then coming out and rounding it all up with Joe Rogan, with the Joe Rogan Experience. We're just here, and we're thankful to be covering it all right here with you, Bedford. Thanks so much for joining us today.
I'll see you tomorrow.
When we come back, we'll have highlights from Trump's Latino roundtable in Miami. Don't go anywhere. Earlier today, Donald Trump sat down for a roundtable with Latino leaders in Miami, Florida.
It was such an honor to work for you at the White House all 4 years, and I got a front row seat of how much you cared about the Latino community, and you delivered results, and you didn't pander to us. You gave us opportunity, and that's what we want. You know, we want the American dream.
Here to break it all down for us is Blaze Media's national correspondent, Julio Rosas. So, Julio, give us some of the biggest takeaways from the event today.
Well, the biggest takeaway is that, along with what the polling has shown so far, is that Kamala Harris is really struggling with Latinos. I mean, this has been historically a crucial voting bloc for Democrats, and they struggled leading up to the election that's coming up here. But there was that recent poll from the USA Today where Trump's in the lead 48% to 37%. And the other polling that has shown Harris in the lead with Latinos, it's only by a couple digits. It's nowhere near kind of the support and the enthusiasm that Democrats were hoping for when Joe Biden stepped down. And so today, that's why it's significant for Trump to come down here to South Florida, even though it's pretty much guaranteed that Florida is going to be red this election cycle. A big reason for that is for Latinos in South Florida, which, again, Miami-Dade County historically has been a very deep blue district, and it's been going more and more conservative with these past few election cycles. And so the common theme for sure was the concern about Kamala Harris's approach to the economy, to the border, and saying that this is socialism. You know, what she's advocating for is socialism, communism, and obviously when you have the Cuban population, the Venezuelan population, that's very heavy in South Florida, those voters are not going to go for that by any stretch.
Julio, a lot of times these conferences, whether based on race, ethnicity, whatever, are full of these terrible nails on the chalkboard moments for any normal American. And for instance, I mean, I'm curious how you thought it played off. There's a lot of pandering that goes on. Was this just normal and natural? Were there some moments where it was a little strange? I mean, how many times did people use the word Latinx, for instance?
Well, there was none of that, and if there was, I would have been the first one to say, "Hey, don't do that." But no, I mean, for me, it was just very authentic. Just hearing the support and from the crowd and obviously the participants in the roundtable, because again, there is that deep connection to faith, which was brought up many times, and in fact, the event ended with the attendees praying for Trump. Obviously, not just for his election prospects, but also for his safety, right? After those two attempted assassinations. But also just the fact that, again, the Latino community is very family orientated. And they feel that kind of connection with Trump when it comes to wanting to support families, when it comes to improving the economy, when it comes to not being so radically pro-abortion like Harris and Tim Walz have been. So I think it really showed, again, the unconventional support that the media might not be used to, right? Because I mean, some of the biggest applause lines from today's event was when people were saying we need to secure the border and we need to deport all these illegal immigrants, and you have all these non-white, non-Rust Belt voters cheering for that, right? And so I think that's going to further confuse the mainstream media and Democrats. I think that's why their attempts to reach out to the Latino community have been kind of very awkward and very, doesn't very feel authentic, because I mean, the classic example from the Biden-Harris administration was when First Lady Jill Biden compared Latinos to the variety like breakfast tacos from San Antonio. I mean, it's very weird. Like, you kind of get where they're coming from,
Yeah.
but like that's not how you would approach any normal person in a normal setting.
Julio, in about 60 seconds that we have left, you mentioned Miami-Dade County down there. And in Florida right now, early voting is open. So take us through the numbers that you've seen, because there's a lot of enthusiasm down there for Donald Trump right now.
Yes. So right now, Republicans are leading with combined of in-person early voting and mail-in ballots. When you throw it all together, Republicans are leading by 42% as opposed to 37% with Democrats, and there's about 20% with no party affiliation, right? And so, it was expected for Republicans to lead that overall vote count, but they weren't really expecting this to be leading by that much. And with Miami-Dade County, they're only leading by 4 points, Democrats. They're only leading so far by that, single digit. And again, this is historically very, very deep blue. And so I think that speaks to the enthusiasm. Obviously, it speaks to the confidence that voters have with early voting and mail-in voting. Democrats are leading just that category with mail-in ballots, which is, again, kind of to be expected. But just the fact that many Republicans are also doing mail-in ballots is significant, because of obviously there are the concerns about the integrity of that. But I think one reason why people are willing to do either of those two options is just the fact that with Trump almost dying a couple of times, people kind of think, oh yeah, if they're obviously we may not be targeted in that way, but things can happen between now and election day, and so they want to make sure that their vote is in for Trump prior to November 5th.
Julio, we like knowing that those blue counties out there maybe going a little purple at this moment in time. Thanks so much for the update. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Matthew and I will come back and wrap up the show right after this. Don't go anywhere. We're 14 days away from the election, and I think one of the biggest stories, though, was when Daniel Horowitz was on the show, and he was talking about the inflation and all of the, kind of spineless Republicans that we have out there. Matthew, one of the things is when he was saying you can no longer kick the can down the road when it comes to inflation. Well, I hear that and I go, Oh, that's classic fourth turning. You can't keep pushing the can down the road. You actually have to address the problems, because now, guys, we're in the crisis phase, and there's no way out of it except through it.
Yeah, I mean, the only way out is through. That's my mantra. I mean, it applies to everything, because we're in this situation now where it's not just, right, the finances, although that's an enormous part of the story. In all these areas, this is going to hit the fan. You know what is going to hit the fan? And people can start to sense that. They can tell that it's happening. And with the money, though, it is crazy, because we've been told our entire lives by conservatives, right?
It's fine.
Well, no, but also, like, it's going to end, it's going to end, it's going to end. And after you hear that for like 40 years, you're kind of like, I don't know, maybe we just keep going. And that's what they're doing. They're just going. But the fundamental problem at the root of all this is that the administrative state is in charge. The permanent federal government is in charge. They tell Congress what to do, and those guys do not feel like they have any authority to really rein this in, or they even have the power to rein it in anymore. And that is worrisome.
And the BRICS countries are meeting right now. In Russia, it's China, it's Brazil, it's India, it's South Africa. They're all meeting, trying to say, hey, you know what? Maybe we could do something other than the U.S. dollar, but bring it back here at home. And Dr. Robert Epstein, every time we have him on, it does just blow my mind to hear the amount of people that could possibly be swayed in this election cycle. He said it was 6.4 million to 25.5 million that could possibly be swayed by Google results this election cycle.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is they won't even necessarily know at all that they've been swayed, right? The fish does not see the water it swims in, and that's what's going on here. So until people become aware that this is happening, it's going to keep happening.
But he did say 49 out of the 50 states are being affected by this. And he said Arkansas is not being affected. So I don't know what they're doing in Arkansas, but I want to hang out with them, because if you can't be swayed by this, you have to be part of our team here.
That's strong.
Yeah.
Strong. Arkansas strong, I guess. Yeah.
I just love that they went through and they were like, okay, there's so many things. And he's like, if you think you're not being affected by it, you absolutely are. Except the people in Arkansas.
Patriots.
They are. And that's what you look at. And that's what we want here at Blaze News tonight. So all the Patriots, be sure to join us in this cause, because who knows, on again, November 5th, huge day. November 6th is going to be just as big for so many different reasons. But go ahead and be sure to tune in and go ahead and go through and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, rate and review the show, and don't forget to come back and see us here to break it all down tomorrow night.